Kathy Donohue was a native of Allentown, Pennsylvania, but she eventually moved to Washington, D.C. for a job. In 1979, 31-year-old Kathy was living in Arlington, Virginia, and working as a union secretary. Kathy was very outgoing and well-liked. On March 2, 1979, she went out to dinner at a restaurant in Georgetown with some of her coworkers. She never made it home afterwards. The following morning, her body was found by a person walking through a parking lot on Hamlin Street in Glenarden, Maryland. She had been brutally beaten, strangled, and raped. Kathy's body was found miles away from her home in Virginia. She had taken a cab home from the restaurant the night before her body was found, but police could never identify the driver. With no witnesses or suspects, Kathy's case went cold. The killer had left DNA behind on Kathy's body, which would prove to be critical evidence a few decades later. The DNA was retested over the years, but it did not identify a potential suspect. Then, in 2020, the Prince George's County State's Attorney applied for and received federal funding to use genetic genealogy in some of the county's cold cases. Investigators obtained a court order to allow them to use the technique in Kathy's case, as is required by Maryland law. Investigators found a distant relative of the killer in a commercial DNA database, and then spent 38 months working with Othram Inc. to build a family tree and retest the DNA evidence. The effort ultimately did identify a potential suspect. This potential suspect was living in Pinehurst, North Carolina. Investigators retrieved a plastic fork from the trash can outside of his house and tested it for DNA. The DNA from the fork was a match to DNA found on the slip Kathy had been wearing at the time of her murder. In March of 2025, police returned to the home to arrest its occupant. 82-year-old Roger Zotis Brown was arrested and charged with first-degree murder, rape, and related counts in Kathy's murder. There is currently no known connection between Brown and Kathy Donohue. Upon his arrest, Brown's demeanor was reportedly cold, and he showed no reaction. He is awaiting extradition to Maryland to face the charges against him. Brown does have a criminal record. He had been arrested in 1967 and served an 11-year sentence for armed robbery in Nassau County, New York. He was released in June of 1978, less than a year before Kathy was killed. At the time of her murder, he had been living in Hyattsville, a city in the same county where Kathy was murdered. He had moved to North Carolina in 2017. While several members of Kathy's family have passed away since her murder, her brother and sister are still alive. Following Brown's arrest, they released a statement thanking investigators for their ongoing work on Kathy's case. We will always be grateful for their determination, their compassion, and their relentless pursuit of the truth, which has finally given us a sense of closure that we never thought possible after all this time, they said. On April 20th, 2002, police in Copley, Ohio were called out to the Red Roof Inn on Rothrock Road for a report that there was a man slumped over in the driver's seat of a Chevrolet van parked there. When they arrived, they realized that the man was dead. He had been shot once in the head. For the first time in 3 years, there had been a murder in Copley Township. The victim was 28-year-old Stephen Lindsey. Stephen was a kind and giving person who had many friends. He made people feel like they were a part of his family, and he would do anything to help them. His death was therefore a great loss to his community, as well as a complete shock, since no one who knew him could think of a reason why anyone would want to kill him. Police also could not find any witnesses or any reports of suspicious behavior in the area, leaving them with few leads to follow. They conducted dozens of interviews, even traveling out of state to conduct some of them, but could still not identify Stephen's killer. The case would remain cold for more than 20 years, and only be solved thanks to a deathbed confession. Shortly after Stephen's murder, police had identified a prime suspect, a 20-year-old named Neil Anderson. However, they did not have sufficient evidence to confirm their suspicions, and therefore never charged him with the crime. Anderson did spend some time in prison for drug-related offenses in the years after Stephen's murder. He died in March of 2023 after battling a serious illness. In November of 2024, Anderson's brother, whose name has not been released, came to police. The brother informed them that Neil had confessed to killing Stephen Lindsey while he was on his deathbed. Neil had also provided specific details about the crime that only the police and the killer would know. Neil claimed to have shot Stephen because Stephen had let him borrow some money, and Neil did not want to pay him back. Neil's brother told police that he had waited a year and a half to inform them of the confession because he wanted to spare his family the pain of knowing what Neil had done. Neil's brother passed away just 1 month after telling police of Neil's deathbed confession. Investigators then spent several months continuing to work on the case. When they were confident that they had sufficiently verified the information provided by Neil Anderson's brother, they closed the case. In March of 2025, they announced that Stephen's murder was considered solved and identified Neil Anderson as his killer. According to one of Stephen's friends, even though Anderson is not alive to be prosecuted for the crime, the announcement of his identification has given Stephen's mother some sense of closure. Lachelle Shelley Waite was a kind and loving young woman with a good heart and a future full of promise. The 18-year-old was a recent graduate of Maryvale High School in Phoenix, Arizona, where she had tutored other students and been active in choir and dance. At the beginning of 1986, Shelley was working at a discount department store in the Maryvale Mall. That January 16th, Shelley's 20-year-old sister Annette went to Shelley's home near 59th Avenue and Thomas Road to give her a ride to work. When Annette went inside, however, she discovered her younger sister's body in a bedroom. She had been strangled to death. Several items, including jewelry and a gun, had been stolen from Shelley's home, but there were no signs of forced entry. Police therefore theorized that Shelley may have known her killer to some degree. According to a later press release from the Phoenix Police Department, detectives had a strong investigative lead at the time, but didn't have enough evidence to make an arrest, and the case went cold. In 2016, detectives with Phoenix Police Department's Cold Case Homicide Unit completed a full review of Shelley's case. In doing so, they identified a piece of evidence that investigators had been unable to process in 1986. Presumably, this is because the technology needed to test for DNA was not widely available to law enforcement yet. In 2022, the cold case team was finally able to have the evidence submitted for advanced DNA testing. The exact nature of the evidence has not been publicly disclosed, presumably due to ongoing legal proceedings. This testing did identify a suspect. On February 20th, 2025, 70-year-old Alfred Earl Green was arrested and charged with first-degree murder, with his arrest being made 39 years after Shelley was killed. It is the oldest cold case homicide arrest in the history of the Phoenix Police Department. At the time of his arrest, Green was already incarcerated. In 1989, he had received a life sentence after being convicted of a different murder. In 1988, he shot and killed his ex-girlfriend, 29-year-old Yolanda Taylor, in front of her 2 children. It has been reported that Green had been a friend of Shelley's boyfriend at the time she was killed. Prosecutors allege that Green sold the jewelry and firearm stolen from Shelley's home shortly after her murder. Green had his first court appearance in relation to Shelley's case on February 22nd, and the proceedings are ongoing. During a press conference announcing Green's arrest, Phoenix detective Dominic Rostenberg said, "Being able to finally let the family know, and also let the community know, that after 39 years, we're still working on these cases, trying to get justice for them, for the victims and their families, speaks to what this unit is all about."